Hello, how are you everyone? Welcome to this conference. We've had the opportunity to offer to you through the Tecnológico of Monterrey and the Tony Blair's Foundation about multiculturalism and vulnerability in juridics. This is the case of immigrant people in the northeast of Mexico. We want to send special regards to the delegates of the university in Philippines. It's a sister university that is the University of Ateneo de Zamboanga. It's an honor to us to be with us today and present about this reality in the northeast in our country, Mexico, and present to you the globalization phenomenon and multiculturality and the situations these processes are going through today. Likewise, we want to send our special regards to all the students receiving this signal and to anyone linked to the Faith and Globalization Initiative of Tony Blair Foundation. So be welcome, and we hope, I hope my colleagues with me to be able to present to you a space of reflection about multiculturality. Now, first, let's have a first approach about multiculturalism. Multiculturalism, with its semantic ambiguity that is difficult to explain, a phenomenon like this can be understood as a political language, specifically modern and created around the rhetorical of identity. It is so complicated, my dear delegates and students, to talk about multiculturalism when identity is not included, conceptually speaking. Identity itself is the axis on which each one can take and adopt a cultural contour. That's why we include these implications that have to do with identity. And even more, this ambiguity has made multiculturalism to be seen from three different points, among others, which are as a social fact, as a political model, or an ideology. This is well established by Francisco Counsel in Reasons About Identity he published in the Anthropos Publisher in Barcelona. That is why, my dear friends, is that multiculturalism references identity of social, political, ideological, and historical actors. And it moves into great axes regarding identity that are justice and nationality. How can we exercise justice in the midst of a globalization where the transit of different cultures and movements are taking place throughout the world? We are living the case of the northeast of our country, Mexico, but this phenomenon is understood to be given throughout the world. Justice and nationality are crossing one another, they are overlapping precisely before the matter of identity, and this identity that has to be evaluated and re-evaluated before the multicultural phenomenon in the globalization we are living nowadays. And from this, we get the rights of citizenship, and are going to be the rights that belong to those who live among us, even though they are not the same as us. That would be like a word game, but it is important to understand this concept given by Dr. Rosa García about juridic vulnerability that she's going to speak about later on. where do they reside in this multicultural phenomenon? What are the rights of that citizen that is in a process of anchoring their identities because he has left his place, his birthplace, and he's in the transit towards other nations, states, as it is happening here in Mexico, that later on many immigrants want to go to the United States. So this juridical vulnerability is going to be a matter that is going to be reviewed later on today. Likewise, this has made these multiculturalism characters as a target of different conflicts that come from fights for territories and identities themselves, on which, by Presbyterian Luis Eduardo Villarreal, we are going to hear about a society that has brought these multicultural characters that are in the transit from one identity to another. Okay, with this, now let's listen to Rosa Maria about the Central American immigrants in transit going through the city of Monterrey, and let's see the roots of their vulnerability. Welcome, Rosa. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. In this part, I want to present today. First, I'll try to present the geographical differences of where we are and the point where you are, so that we can know where we are located. When we are talking about Monterrey, I want you to understand where we are exactly in the country and what this point means in the immigration route for Central American men and women that come illegally into Mexico. So first, we have this slide on which we present the route of the Gulf. We are in the northeast of the country, and we have border with the state of Texas in the United States, and we call this the route of the Gulf because it's the one that is close to the Gulf of Mexico. Mainly, the immigrant people come irregularly by the state of Chiapas or Tabasco in the south, and they go on this route, especially by bus or by train, until they get to the northeast of the country. Is it possible to highlight where Monterrey is? Okay. Well, Monterrey is where you see this delta that you see on the northeast part, the upper part. There is where we are located. This is the city of Monterrey, very close to the border, but we are not a border city. Now, I would like to deepen a little bit more on the roots of this vulnerability they already have with themselves, and why we focus on these Central American immigrants. This Central American region, it's a complicated region. They have a history with many deficiencies in politics, socially, economically speaking, and that's why those peoples expel their population. Now, if we see it from the human rights point of view, these countries where they remain are the first states that are vulnerable in the first instance on the human rights of these people that have to go out trying to find a destination in order to get a better condition of life. Why Central American? Here on the chart, we can see that from 2005 to 2012, just to give you this last period of 7 years, Central American immigrants are the vast majority that coming regularly to the Mexican territory. The percentage goes from 92 to 95%. And when they arrive to the north, they continue to be this vast majority of Central American immigrants, especially from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Now, talking about Mexico, in Mexico they face a situation of criminalization, and I want to talk more about this juridic vulnerability, and we have this stigma of the immigrant saying that he's a threat, that he's a criminal. Now, the migratory policies in the Mexican country, we have a paradigm of contention of population, contention of frontiers, because it is understood that immigration is not a social phenomenon, but a topic of national safety. Considering this relation we have with the United States because of the borders, then we have these agendas. Mexico is going to be like an envelope for those groups that want to go in the United States as a funnel. And from that point of view, this immigration point is understood as a topic of national safety. And this is where we can see this vulnerability, juridic and the social vulnerability for the immigrant when they are in Mexico. This graph has a reason for this relation between these two vulnerabilities, social and juridic, because it's not that one is before the other, but they complete one another. They have some relation between themselves. Now, just to highlight on this conceptualization of juridic vulnerability, let's say what it means is this condition of lack of defense a person faces from parting from the juridic and legal work frames when they are in a certain territory or from the global perspective. For example, before the United Nations, when this is a refugee or stuff like that. But in general, it could be this condition of lack of defense from what in the law it is said that this person can do or can't do. They can trigger or stop a situation linked to the conditions of life the person can exercise. How and where is juridic vulnerability manifested from those immigrants in Mexico? Now, it is talking about this state of belonging to a different political community where they don't belong to, better said, ruled by the immigration laws in the country of Mexico. Precise aspects where we can find this vulnerability. Here we have some clues. In Mexico, migration was regulated until the year 2011 through the General Law of Population, meaning there was no specific law that presented the guidelines by which the Mexican government was going to deal the immigration topic. And another interesting data is that irregular immigration was a fault in Mexico up to 2007, and now it is only a fault. In May 25, 2011, we had the law of immigration, but it was until a year and months later, on September 28, 2012, we saw that they approved the rules for that law to be enforced. And in November, they applied their administration alignments. Now, it is important to give you the dates because in spite of having the law, in spite of having it approved, it couldn't be working until it would be accepted, and until they presented the rules and alignments. So that presents problems in the faces in the generation of gray areas where human rights of immigrants were kind of lost between the previous regulations and the new ones. Now, in 2011, we also had an important reform in the Mexican Constitution, on which in Article number 1, we brought the human rights of all the people that are in the country. This is something very positive, and now I want to put clear that now we have a reform where they want to delete this range in the Constitution in the human rights. However, and in spite of having this positive modification in the year 2005, the National Institute of Migration, that is the office that operates the immigration law, is proclaimed as an office of national safety. So now we can see how the truth face immigration has in the country of Mexico, and the way to deal with this immigration phenomenon, that is thinking about it from the point of view of national security, in which immigration is perceived as a threat for the territorial and sovereign integrity of the country of Mexico. In the immigration law, some rights were given to the immigrants, no matter what their condition was, meaning these rights, they could have freedom to health, education, they can go to the civil registration, have family unity, they receive information and have access to justice, no matter what their condition is, no matter if they are regular or irregular in the country. They also have duties. They must keep their documents, show it when it is required, and observe other Mexican laws. Now, the problems we see with the immigration law is that there are many hidden points. If we see the law, maybe we would see that human rights of immigrants are protected. But if we review article per article, and if we see the way it is separated and the way to exercise them, we can see there are some irregular practices on which this vulnerability is revealed. About the immigration regulation that is in here, I want to show this vulnerability into parts. This is the immigration regulation and then the controls. They can only regularize their situation with this new law. The people that say are married or are concubines of a Mexican person, or a foreign person that is now a Mexican resident, that are a father, a mother, or a son. If they have a family link to a Mexican person that have been victims or witnessed a terrible offense, for example, humanitarian visas for 1 year that can be renewed or may not. Now, this is a regularization, or a person that is in vulnerability condition. If they are elderly people, a person underage, or children that have entered the country because of the traffic of people. About the working permits, it was possible before that if a person was working here or was in Mexico in an irregular way, they could change their immigration condition, and there was a possibility in the past. That permit was eliminated, and now all the residences or permits because of a job must be done through a consulate. First, there must be an offer of a job, and then the procedures will be done from the Mexican consulate in the country the person comes from. It is very interesting and very complex because it is something that impacts us here in San Nicolás, where we have immigrants that are irregularly in Mexico. They get a job, and they get a boss or a chief that wants to do all the process, but it's very complicated for the immigrant to leave the country and follow all the process from the consulate. This gets complicated. Now, for these changes to happen in their immigrant condition, immigrant people have to pay fines and rights that are very, very high for the economical condition they go through, especially for the Central American immigrants that have to enter into Mexico running away from those difficult situations. We can see they are very high prices, 2,350 pesos for people that are not able to pay, are here, and they don't have the means to get a job where they can have a very good income. Because of that vulnerability, they don't have the permit, and then we go into this vicious circle. Do I still have time?
Okay.
Good. Now, I want to talk about the counterpart of this situation of regulation, which is immigration control. This is something very complex, and this is where we can see a tough operation from Mexico, and where we can see perfectly well this idea of safety that is given to immigrants. With this new law, for example, we have Article 81 that says that they can have review of documents, and another article says that they can have visits to verify in any place of the country. For example, this immigration review can be done in specific geographical areas that don't belong, or points that are established in transit. This opens the door for having hidden or gray areas or tough practices that could have contingency interests going against privacy and safety of those people, no matter what their condition in the country is. For example, the National Office of Immigration can link an operation with the federal police, and in spite of having protection for shelters and different places where we can give help to the immigrants, in the event they want to have a movement, they can do it and make vulnerable not only the shelters, in this case Casa Nicolás, have vulnerability in the physical integrity of the immigrants, and also bring vulnerability in the integrity of immigrants themselves. That is permitted in spite of having some protections in the law. Likewise, it is established that there must be a measurement that is well regulated that talks about the temporary shelter for immigrants. That temporary lounging is not but a detention, but there is an interesting use in order to soften what these actions really are. Here it is said that it cannot go beyond 36 hours. This launching after the person was held. However, if we go and see the law itself, we can see that this detention can go up to 15 days, and if the paperwork is not finished in these 15 days, there will be an extension up to 60 days, or until we have an administration or judicial resource will be done. We could be talking that about that by law it is permitted to have a detention that is not defined on time on people. And we have known of people that have been for 6 or 9 months in an immigration station. And just to finish, now here we can see that in Mexico we are in this tough situation. On one hand, we have immigration. We understand it's a social phenomenon, a human phenomenon. However, if we see it from the political and state point of view, it is understood as a phenomenon of national safety. We have to ask ourselves if we really are talking about safety for citizens, or if we have to talk about a broader term that is this human safety, no matter where those people belong to. And we could talk about this and bring it to a human description, not just political. That would be it. And now I would like to pass it over to Father Luis Gerardo. Well, Rosy has given us details on the points that are contradictory for these laws that won't guarantee protection or safety for the immigrants as they transit through Mexico. There is a lack of ability in the countries sending them and in our country, that is a country in transit, although it's also a country sending people and receiving back people from immigration. We have problems in the structure to protect human rights of the immigrants. We won't go in details talking about the historical responsibility, if a certain government has to do this, or if this phenomenon, like in the case of Honduras in the weather, that Hurricane Mitch was for 4 days in their territory and reduced their development for 30 years. Of course, this is an extraordinary factor, but there are problems in the structures and the lack of the ability to establish political institutions. There is a lack of economical equity. Globalization says that it was supposed to finish with poverty as we globalize social well-being. However, we can see that globalization has created more hunger and more suffering in the world. So, immigration cannot be done without violence. This is the phenomenon data we have, and this is where we have to present this ethical situation. The biggest challenge can be done on these terms. How can we avoid suffering in the immigrants, foreign people, as they go through Mexico, especially talking about women that are doubly exploited, vulnerable? They live a higher risk just because being women. And this is a very important reality. That is the society we live in, and it doesn't have to do only with Latin American countries. In all the countries of the world, women suffer just because they are women. So in here is an ethical challenge, how to face the suffering of these people. An historical antecedent, or several historical antecedents, tell us that it is possible to make structures, juridical structures, political, social, that break this monoculturalism that sometimes has tried to remain, no matter how much blood is shed. And we could quote examples such as the slavery in the United States, the civil war that started in the north, slavery in the north against, and the favorable results to abolish of this structure that caused a lot of suffering, especially in the African people. We can talk about the defeating of Nazism in Germany in the half of the last century, how that national trend, socialist trend, wanted to make a race to prevail above the others, and it was a situation that caused a suffering of millions of people that were slaughtered in South Africa. And we can make a longer list. The indigenous people in Mexico, after India, is the second country with more living languages in the world. Mexico has 62 ethnics, 32 living languages that are current. But it has an indigenous population that is way behind from us. It lacks about a lack of ability to recognize the rights of those people as people with social rights. And this is where Rosie depicted in a good way, and even though she didn't give more details, but she pointed to more contradictory situations in the lack of ability to ensure or to make sure the transit of immigrant people in Mexico. So we have a problem that multiculturalism is not treated as something intercultural. And this phenomenon in the world, I think, first, migration is a data of important numbers. In Africa, Savannah is the place where they started with this change of stage in the human evolution, and from that place the rest of the population in the world integrated. We all have to do with immigration one way or another. Humankind is not explained as an error without an end. It has no point of discussion. Why not get this data? Why not create the conditions so that this migration won't be a product of an expel or running away or a rejection or a discrimination, as is already happening? So, here we have the challenges. How can we make our societies not only plural societies, but societies that promote pluralism? This is a sociological position before diversity and multiculturality. That would be a very good action. How to be pluralist? How to create conditions of interculturality in order to take advantage of the richness of immigration. It is proved that any immigration enriches. Why criminalize it? This is the important point. A society that is not only multicultural but intercultural. Meaning, why don't we put cultures in a dialogue for them to enrich one another? In the humankind history, there are data, historical records on how there is no, you won't find a pure race. All the races have been mixed, all the civilizations, all the cultures have been formed with the richness from one another. I think the Bible would be a clear example on how Judaism was not a pure race. It has influences from Mesopotamia and different influences, and then Christianity has the Roman influence and the Hellenic influence. We have Paul from Tarsus preaching in Athens, in the Areopagus, saying, I have seen the gods you have here, and you are very religious people. But I have found a statue for the unknown God, and I want to talk about him. And that's where he started to preach. But that is the example, the religious example, if I may say so. But tell me, which culture doesn't have to do anything with religion? So there was Paul fitting himself in a culture that was far from Christianity. However, he took advantage of the assets in that culture in order to propose, to promote a religious faith. And for him was a way to save them. A juridical work frame, like as Rosie was saying, is not only including human rights, for God's sake, but that creates the conditions so that these human rights can be known, ventilated, promoted, protected, and guaranteed, right? Because it's very easy to present a law and say in the Congress, we have done the work, we have won the bonus or this benefit because we have made a formula that includes human rights. But this is not the end of the work. It's not like that. Protection for human rights requires the examples of offenses, sanctions, the political will to enforce the law. But we still a long way to go through before that happens. A juridic work frame where the rationality goes far beyond control. Rosie said that before. That goes beyond just try to align the law of immigration with the agreements, the international agreements our country has signed already. This is very simple to do. Here we respect human rights, as it says in the Universal Statement of 1948. Okay, but this is just on the paper. Now, let's start making an analysis of the information from the United Nations. The United Nations has done on the human rights in Mexico, especially for the immigrants, and there we will compare if this law is true or not, or to make sure if it's operating with other races. Another point that I think is important is the recognition of the countries that receive immigrants, the need they have. They have to recognize the need they have of immigration. This is a key point. Fortunately, in the United States, more and more they spread, they present the information and the conscious and the ideological position that this country that is multicultural has been formed and put on the summit and in the first place as a world power thanks to the workforce, thanks to the cultures of the immigrants that have been established and incorporated in their working class. So, if they recognize, if we recognize we need labor or this kind of qualified support, we would stop criminalizing the immigrants in the United States. So, this would be a revolution, an ideological revolution, and it would facilitate things to us who are working on this, defending the condition of vulnerability of the immigrant people. I would like to finish before presenting a video in Casa Nicolás with a colophon, a religious and cultural one. All religious traditions that are present as a tattoo in the cultures present nice examples of interculturality. We can't understand Hinduism without the other religions. We can't understand Buddhism without the Hinduism. We can't understand Judaism without the Mesopotamic religions, without the influence of the Hellenism. And we won't understand Christianity without Judaism, and so on and so forth. But in all these traditions that are plural, in all these systems of beliefs, there is a golden rule that is common. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Well, this golden rule must be assumed by us, related to our immigrants, brothers and sisters. Let's treat the immigrant, that is the other like me, and at the same time we are the other from them. Let's treat one another the same way we would like to be treated if we were traveling, if we were participating in this human mobilization. Let's treat others as we want to be treated. Okay, now I would like to say that the other people are our brothers and sisters, and we want to illustrate this with this video. This video starts with a quoting of a fragment from the book of Leviticus in the Old Testament. That is a book of statutes that says, treat the foreigner as you treat yourself, because you were a foreigner in Egypt before. And we can see the splendor of the Egyptian culture, beautiful pyramids, right, that are still standing after thousands of years. Well, that beauty, that cultural data that prevails for centuries and millenniums was erected thanks to the blood and the suffering of Hebrew immigrants. And we could talk of huge cultures that have been erected thanks to the labor of immigrants. Let's watch the video, please. Thank you.
Pues yo me llamo Luis Sierra, soy de Guatemala y pues aquí estoy pasándolo aquí para el camino para el norte, para Estados Unidos, y mientras tanto aquí me voy a quedar un mes aquí buscando un trabajo. Pues yo vine pues porque me deportaron, ¿verdad? I
arrived there. I wanted to work, but I couldn't find any job. The situation makes us to go out again.
Todos de alguna manera somos migrantes, ¿no?
One way or another, we all are immigrants.
Los abuelos,
probably our grandparents,
los tíos,
uncles,
o inclusive
even
migrar de un estado a otro.
From one state to another, there was a person that was in solidarity with you, ¿no? In order to establish and make a family from one generation to the other. Monterrey is a route of transit on the way of immigrants going to the north.
Casa Nicolás, bueno,
Casa Nicolás is a shelter.
que ofrece
that
un lugar
offers
seguro
a
para
safe
migrantes.
place to
Ya
immigrants.
sabemos que lo ideal es que no
We know
existieran
the
las
ideal
casas,
is that
que
these
no hubiera
shelters didn't
necesidad
exist. It would
de
be
proteger
great
al
that
migrante.
there wouldn't be need to
Pero
protect immigrants,
como su
but
condición de vulnerabilidad
since they have this vulnerability
tan alta,
condition and this condition is
pues
high,
tenemos que
we have
salir al encuentro de
to
él.
go and find them.
Los otros países
Hey,
pues,
help
está más
them.
tranquilo, pues, aquí en México
There
está
are
un poquito más por
Other countries that are
lo
more
que
tranquil.
se ve
Here in
ahora por el
Mexico
crimen organizado, ¿verdad? Todo
is
eso.
affected by
Todo lo que
the
tiene que pasar
organized
uno,
criminality. Everything we have to
Pero
go through
sí,
is difficult,
está un poquito difícil,
but
está
it's
un
kind
poquito
of
peligroso.
difficult. It's kind of dangerous.
Las agresiones a los migrantes
Aggressions
no
to
cesan.
immigrants
en su
won't
mayoría
cease.
centroamericanos.
Most of them are Central Americans, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. These people face and complain about mistreatment from the federals. Another group of killing people known as the Zetas kidnapped immigrants in the city of Reynosa, border city of Reynosa,
Fueron
Tamaulipas.
secuestrados más de
In 2012,
11,000
more than
emigrantes.
11,000 immigrants were kidnapped. They offered them to take them to the United States, and they charge to the relatives $3,000 ransom.
Todo mundo quiere usar del migrante
Everyone wants to
porque
abuse the
ven
immigrant because they see in
una
them
oportunidad
an opportunity
para la ganancia.
to gain.
El solo hecho de no tener
Just because they don't have
tierra,
a
familia,
homeland,
casa,
family, a
sustento,
home,
ya vuelve una
sustentation.
persona vulnerable.
My
Pero
grandpa
además,
was vulnerable, but
una
besides that,
persona
he was a person
socialmente
that was
criminalizada
socially criminalized
porque no
because
trae papeles.
he didn't have papers.
El trabajo que hace Casa Nicolás.
The work
es
done by
tratar
Casa Nicolás
de
is try to
tratar de
present, to
difundir la
spread
problemática, el por qué es
the
necesario
issue. Why
que,
is it necessary
se abriera una casa de migrantes
to open
para
this
alojar a
immigrant
estas
house in order to give shelter to these people
para brindar ayuda
and to
humanitaria,
give
cuestiones
human
de
help to
orientación
them
y asesoría
in
psicosocial,
psychosocial
de salud.
orientation,
En 2004,
health, guidance. In 2004,
habida cuenta de los migrantes que llegaban a la parroquia San
I
Francisco
realized the number of immigrants
de no
arriving
tener
to our
un lugar
parish. And I realized we didn't
ofrecerles.
have a place
Pues empezamos a
to
pensar
offer to them,
en
so
un
we
albergue.
started to
En
think
un albergue.
in about a shelter.
vino este proyecto.
So that's how this
Empezamos a
project
construir
started.
la casa
We started to build a house
en 2004,
in 2004,
y antes de
and
terminar
before
este
finishing
recinto,
this
todavía
place,
no se vaciaba la losa del segundo
we
piso.
hadn't
Cuando en abril del 2000,
built the roof when in April 2008 we started to receive the first immigrants.
Yo le digo, soy franco, cuando
I'm truthful. When we started,
Padre fue armando su equipo,
we were putting things together little by little,
estaba dentro.
and then
Me
in
dijo, oye, mira,
the twinkle of an eye, I was already included here.
tengo experiencia en esto.
And I told him, Father, I don't have experience to work on this, and I don't have the experience. That's why we have to support one another.
Cuando Don Pilo
When Mr. Pillow here with me
construyó esta casa,
built this house,
llegamos a un acuerdo
we made an
para
agreement
dejar, sin tocar estas
so
par de palmeras,
saying we wouldn't touch these palm trees because
representan el oasis.
they represent the
Significar
oasis.
esta casa
That is the meaning of this house, like an oasis in the middle of the desert.
Cuando ves a un migrante cruzar por todas
When
situaciones
we go through this difficult situation, I relate like those miners in Chile. Everyone was paying attention to their condition because they were fighting for their lives. So in here, immigrant people are fighting for their lives. But not everyone knows about our situation.
se sostiene
This house is sustained first by the solidarity of the parish communities, the solidarity of
personas
people
que
that
solamente han donado
have donated
a la casa.
resources to this house,
Rifa
and
anual
because of
que hacemos
yearly raffle we have,
un auto y
we
unos dólares.
raffle a car and some dollars. The voluntary work
Esa presencia
is
de
that
personas
presence
que no tienen
of
otro
people that
interés
have no
que
other
servir
interest
al migrante.
than serving
Así
immigrants.
es como se sostiene.
That's how we support this house.
Pues, lo ayudan bastante a uno en las casas.
These houses help us a lot. We thank God because we meet good people, such as people from churches that open these houses for immigrants. Here in Monterrey, here in this house, Francisco Javier, they have given us lots of help. The main reason is theological. We want to give an answer to the gospel because we believe in the project of the gospel, in the project of fraternity with one another. And this house wants to be the symbol that it is possible to treat the last as the first. Thank you very much for being with us in this space of reflection about multiculturalism and in something very concrete, in a reality that is multicultural, such as the juridic vulnerability of immigrants in the northeast of Mexico. We again send our greetings to the delegates of the university, students, and thank you very much for receiving us in this space, and we hope to continue to share with you. We are at your service. Any questions, any doubt, please send us an email, and we are in seconds of distance. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Luis. Thank you for the invitation. You were kind to be here. And thank you, everyone, for being with us today.